Welcome to the K-State Regen Ag Pod, where we talk all things regenerative agriculture here at Kansas State University, across the state of Kansas and beyond. I'm Nick Detter, your host, and today I'm joined by Dr. Augustine Obour, Professor of Soil Science in the Kansas State University Department of Agronomy. He is based in Hays, Kansas, at the Agricultural Research Center, and he is here today to talk with me about regenerative agriculture in western Kansas and his research. Augustine, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Nick.
Augustine, so just to start, I think what we always ask our guests is just to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about their background and your current role at K-State.
All right, thank you, Nick. Like you said, my name is Augustine Obour. I'm a native of Ghana, Ghana in West Africa, where I had my bachelor's degree. Then I came to the United States, did my master's and PhD at the University of Florida with a specialization in soil management. Then I worked a little bit at the University of Wyoming as a soil scientist. Then I moved to K-State in 2013 as a soil scientist based at the Ag Research Center in Hays. Currently, I'm a professor tenured in the Agronomy Department but based at the Ag Research Center in Hays. My program is mostly focused on soil management in dryland systems, looking at developing management practices, both soil and agronomic management practices to protect soil, improve crop yields and profitability of dryland production systems in western Kansas.
So as you mentioned, you're based out of western Kansas. So just to kind of set the stage for our audience, could you describe the growing environment of western Kansas and some of the unique challenges of trying to implement regenerative agriculture or soil health practices in the western part of the state?
Yeah, thank you. That is an important important question. For we based in a dryland environment, of course, the single most challenge for crop production is water. We are in a water-limited environment. We don't get that much precipitation. And the issue about limited water, too, is just the distribution of water. We do get, for example, in Hays, we do get about 22 to 24 inches of precipitation annually, but the distribution is a problem. Sometimes you can get 5 inches of rainfall within 3 days, and then for a month you don't get another rainfall. So we do get intermittent droughts, and that impact production of crops. And that makes it challenging to implement soil health or regenerative agriculture practices, because some of the pillars of regenerative ag, as you know, is to diversify the cropping system. So if you have limited water, it impacts what you can do, what you can grow, and what you cannot grow. So it's a little bit tough for our environment. And then the other challenge is the wind. The wind blows all the time. Since I've been in Hays, most of the time in the fall, the wind will start blowing all the way to the spring. Sometime in May, it will still be blowing. So that makes it a little bit unique for us to implement some of these practices. But most of the soil management practices, including like having cover on the soil, is something that is important for us because we don't want the soil blowing, right? So, but the challenge is because we are in a water-limited environment, we don't produce that much yields like you have in the eastern part of the state. So oftentimes residue inputs into the system is limited. And the other challenge we have now is herbicide-resistant weeds. That is also a challenge for us because most of our farmers have adopted no-till, and no-till is good for us because it protects the soil. But now we have issues with grasses that we cannot control, and even broadleaves like Palmer amaranth and kochia that we cannot control. So that makes it a little bit challenge for us when you try to adopt no-till. And we've seen some producers are reverting to tillage as a means to control some of these weeds. So these are some of the issues that we have in western Kansas that makes implementing some of these regenerative ag practices a little bit challenging for us.
So I think great job. Thank you for setting the stage. I think that helps people understand what we're dealing with. So now I think I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts of your research and what you found can work in that environment. I think there's kind of three main areas I want to talk about today is tillage management, cover crops, and I know you've done some work on crop-livestock integration also. So we'll just take those one by one. So what have been some of your main research findings around tillage management in western Kansas? And even you mentioned the herbicide-resistant weeds, how farmers can work towards no-till while also addressing their problems with herbicide-resistant weeds?
Yeah, thank you. So tillage, there's several tillage practices. Tillage differs based on the frequency of tillage, the intensity of the tillage operation. For example, it ranges from no tillage at all, to high-intensity tillage operations like conventional till using mobile plow, dick skin, and so forth. So depending on what kind of tillage you have, it can have different effects on crops and also on the soil. So in our research, we've been looking at various tillage management practices. You probably have heard me talk about strategic tillage, which is one of the tillage tools that we've been looking at. I define strategic tillage as one-time tillage operation in an otherwise long-term no-till system to correct some of these challenges we have in no-till, for example, grass weeds or herbicide-resistant weeds, after which the field is returned to no-till. And then I also have some research that we're also looking at occasional tillage. So occasional tillage is 1 or 2 tillage operations every 3 years or more to also control some of these herbicide-resistant weeds that we do have in no-till. So that one is a fixed schedule. So it's a little bit different from strategic tillage because occasional tillage is fixed as part of the production system. So every 3 years or every 4 years, you come in and conduct 1 tillage operation or 2 tillage operations. So we have experiments in Hayes, started in 2014, similar experiments in Garden City, and then also Tribune, looking at these tillage management practices, looking at occasional tillage, 1 tillage practice in the fallow phase of the wheat sorghum fallow rotation before you go to wheat. And then we also looking at 2 tillage practices before going to wheat. And then we have a single tillage after wheat harvest. And then we have a treatment where we are looking at 1 tillage in fallow before wheat, and then after wheat harvest, we have another tillage. And then we compare that to no-till in wheat sorghum fallow rotation. And we've been doing this for over 10 years now. What we found was if you till ahead of wheat in the fallow phase, it doesn't have an impact on wheat yields. In Hayes, we haven't seen any negative effect of tillage ahead of wheat. And in Tribune, the same kind of results. And in Garden City, though, we have seen tilling ahead of wheat sometimes increase winter wheat yields. What we have found, though, is if you till after wheat harvest, in Hayes, we beginning to see some decreases in grain sorghum yields compared to the no-till. And then similar kind of results so in Tribune, but not so much in Garden City. So our recommendation will be if you want to till to control some of these weed issues, then tilling in the fallow phase will be the best strategy, tilling ahead of wheat. And you don't need to till several times. We see just 1 tillage pass in fallow can control grasses and have very good control of windmill grass. This is a shallow-rooted weed, so our recommendation is to till about 2 to 3 inches, not deeper. If you till deeper, then you are going to bury the grasses, and then you may even spread it around. So it's just like if you till deep, you just replanted the grass, and it's not very effective. And we also found that the best timing to do this will be in the summer. In our wheat sorghum fallow rotation system, that is the timing where the risk of erosion is very minimal, because you till in June or July or in August before wheat, then that time the wind doesn't blow that much. And then you go ahead and plant wheat into it in the fall, so you get some soil cover. And then you also want to do this when it's very hot. So you don't want to till when you have forecast that is going to rain. You till in such a way that you look at the forecast, you till at least have a week or so of hot and dry weather. Then in that case, you can get an effective kill, particularly of these grasses like windmill grass. So if you do that, it's very effective. And from the strategic tillage research that we have done, we've seen that the one-time tillage operation can control windmill grass very effectively, and it doesn't come back until maybe after 6 years or so that you begin to see the grasses. So depending on your production system, if you are fortunate, if you get a very good kill, you may not see these grasses come back for a long time, maybe 6 years or more. So strategic tillage could be an effective strategy to control perennial grass weeds in long-term no-till. And when we did that in our long-term no-till plots, we didn't see the effect in that case on wheat yields or grain sorghum yields.
Did you see any effect on like soil organic carbon or aggregate stability?
Yeah, good question. So we did monitor for soil health parameters. We look at aggregate stability. Just one-time tillage did not have any effect on aggregate stability or soil organic carbon or aggregate stability. I mentioned that, or also infiltration. We actually saw an increase in water infiltration with a single tillage pass, which was kind of surprising to us. But we did see an increase in infiltration with the tillage operation. And we also, one thing that we also found was the tillage operation actually decreased penetration resistance, so kind of helping to reduce soil compaction with that. But I think if you do very frequent tillage operation, the results may be different.
Yeah.
So just tilling one time or doing one tillage pass every 3 years, so far we haven't seen any negative effect on soil properties.
You mentioned the depth of the tillage. Are there specific tillage implements that K-State thinks, and based on your research, are more appropriate or less destructive, like fit better in systems versus other tillage implements?
Yes, so this tillage operation, you want to use residue-saving implements like a sweep plow. So in that case, it's a non-inversion type of tillage operation. Yes. So you till shallow, and then you don't turn the soil over. If you disc it, the results will be different. Disking can have a negative impact on the soil as well, and then that can also bury the grasses. So in this case, we are recommending using something like a sweeps, run the sweeps very shallow, between 1 to 2 or maximum 3 inches deep. And then in that case, based on the results that we have seen, it doesn't have any negative effect on the soil.
Well, that's interesting. I think that's, we have that one very kind of specific condition and approach to reduce tillage that may be kind of a middle ground while for addressing these herbicide-resistant weeds, while also protecting our soil health. Another thing I hear from farmers, and you hear other people throw around, is that cover crops can be a way to help manage weeds and address herbicide-resistant weeds if implemented properly. What have you guys found about cover crops in Western Kansas and how those can work in systems?
All right, great. So cover crops. So we have been doing cover crop research since 2008. John started this research in Garden City, and then when I joined K-State, we started doing cover crop research in 2015. Yes, cover crops can help suppress weeds. When you grow cover crops in the spring or grow cover crops in the summer, it can help suppress weeds. But the issue with cover crops is they use water. So in dryland environment, we have seen that growing cover crops ahead of wheat or even ahead of sorghum tend to decrease crop yields. So one thing that we have looked at to take advantage of cover crops to help build soil health and then also suppress weeds is to look at the cover crop as a forage resource. So that is one of the work that I've been doing since 2015, looking at utilizing cover crops as a forage resource, either grazing the cover crop or haying the cover crop. So currently we have one of the long-term cover crop grazing experiments in the whole of Western U.S. We've had it for about, we're going on our 12th year now, and we're finding very interesting results. And I can share some of those results with you. We found that cover crop biomass productivity varies from year to year. So if you want to use this cover crop as a forage resource, you should be aware of that. And in some years, we can get about as much as about 6,000 pounds per acre dry matter, like last year when we got very good rainfall. And in some years, we get about 1,000 or 1,000 to 1,500 pounds per acre. So if you want to graze this, you have to know this. In some years, the production may not be enough for grazing and also providing protection for the soil. And one thing that we also found was the impact on weed yields varies from year to year. In some years, we don't see any effect on subsequent crop yields. But in other years, we measured about 30 to 50% yield decreases with cover crops ahead of winter wheat or grain sorghum. And one thing that we found out also was the impact on wheat yields doesn't matter whether you graze the cover crop, you hay it, or you leave it as a true cover crop. So the negative effect on yields in years when it's dry is the same. So if you use the cover crop as a forage resource, then you get some economic benefit by grazing the cover crop or haying the cover crop. So we just completed the economic analysis on that study, and we found that when you graze the cover crop or you hay it, most of the time the overall cropping system profitability is higher when you use the cover crop as a forage resource. And even in years like 2023, when we had crop failure, we had both winter wheat failed, grain sorghum also did not produce any grain. And even in that year, growing a cover crop and using it as a forage resource, the profitability was greater than the chem fallow treatment. One thing that we found out is we can grow the cover crop and suppress weeds. We kind of reduce the amount of herbicide application, about two herbicide sprays with growing a cover crop. But if you grow the cover crop as a true cover crop, then the net returns is less than the chem fallow, because there is a cost associated with the cover crop seed and also planting of the cover crop. So you are not only you are saving on herbicide, but you have costs associated with the cover crop seed. So the overall net returns most of the time is less than the chem fallow treatment, unless in that 2 years where we didn't have the yields with the cover crop and the chem fallow treatment were the same. In that sense, there was not much statistical differences. But in most years, just using the cover crop as a true cover crop without any grazing to get some economic return out of it is less than the chem fallow treatment.
So like you said, it sounds like if we're going to make cover crops, more intense systems work in Western Kansas, we're going to have to be able to utilize it as some kind of a forage research.
Yes, some kind of a forage resource. And then we also look at what about if we graze the cover crop, are we losing the soil health benefit of the cover crop? So we've been monitoring that. We look at soil organic matter content, agri stability, and we found that the soil organic matter improvements with grazing of the cover crop is the same as when you leave it as a true cover crop. And one of the things that we have consistently see an improvement is agri stability. When we grow a cover crop, whether we hay the cover crop, we leave it as a true cover crop, most of the time agri stability is enhanced compared to the chem fallow. And this chem fallow is no-till. It's a no-till chem fallow. So we tend to see an improvement in soil health, in this case, physical properties of the soil, like soil structure, agri stability. We see penetration resistance is less where we had a cover crop versus the chem fallow. And then we also look at residue cover. If we graze the cover crop, we were removing about 40 to 50% of the above ground biomass. And when we hay the cover crop, we were removing about 70% of the above ground biomass. But still, the residue cover is similar to the chem fallow when we hay it. When we graze, the residue cover is significantly greater than the chem fallow when we graze the cover crop.
So just to reiterate that, if what you would recommend for folks that are trying to integrate this or use this as a forage resource is to not graze more than 70%? Is that the number you gave?
No, we recommending about 50%, 50 to 60% of grazing, so that you leave enough residue there. We want to manage this for soil health, right? So if you graze a little bit, there is a tendency for overgrazing. Yes. So we're recommending to, based on our data that we have, if we graze about 40 to 50%, we are not seeing any negative effect on the soil. We had some on-farm study that we did for 3 years where we're looking at grazing 50%, 75%, and 90%. In that case, we did not see any negative effect on the soil as well. But it was a dry year, 3 dry successive years. So we don't have long-term data on that, but our preliminary results show that you can graze about 75% of the above ground biomass and still not have a negative effect. But the issue is, if you do this on farm, though, there's potential for regrowth, right? So you graze the cover crop and allowing for maybe 2 to 3 weeks before you terminate the cover crop. Then these grasses can regrow, provide enough residue to protect the soil.
And then what was your guys' recommendations on where people should cut in terms of if they're cutting for hay?
Yes, that is also very important. In our research, we were intentionally cutting the hay in the cover crop. We cut it about 6 inches, 15 centimeters above ground. So in that case, we have enough residue on the soil surface to protect the soil. And this is very important, having something. If you hay it around 2 inches or 3 inches, possibly the results will be different because you want to have enough residue on the soil surface. And one thing I want to point out is we do all this for both cool season and warm season grasses. The warm season grasses like Sudan grass and forest sorghum, cutting it at a very high height, like 15 centimeters, also reduces the chances of high nitrates because most of the nitrates will be accumulated in the base, right, of the plant. So if you harvest it at 6 inches tall, then you leave most of the high nitrate levels. You are not picking that up. So that is also a good thing by harvesting at a little bit higher cutting height.
So you just mentioned forage sorghum and sorghum Sudan. What are some of these cover crops you guys have been experimenting with, or forage crops, whatever term you want to use, when you're looking at a forage resource?
Yeah, so we mostly looking at grasses that are well adapted to our environment. So we looking at triticale, oat. So we do both spring triticale and winter triticale. They are all well adapted to our environment. And when we add legumes, these are peas that we have added in the past. So our grazing experiment, we started with oat triticale pea. And then for our summer cover crops, we normally will have 4 species mixture. So we had sorghum Sudan, millet, we had cowpeas, and then we had sun hemp in the mixture as well. But most of the time is dominated by the grasses. So the summer cover crops will be dominated by Sudan grass, and we also have millets in there. The cowpea do well. The sun hemp does very, very well. It grows as tall as the Sudan grass most of the time. Yeah, so, but the seed is very expensive. It's a very expensive seed. And our cool season grasses will be mostly oat and triticale, like I said. And we also will add some peas in there, but most of the time it will be dominated by the grasses. We don't do cereal rye that much because of issues with potential contamination with winter wheat. But we tend to do triticale and oat.
So if a producer was interested in this, but maybe worried about the seed costs, just kind of sticking with some of those grasses that might help reduce some of their seed costs and their cover crops.
Yes, the seed costs of the grasses are relatively cheap. Until recently, now triticale is a little bit more expensive because of a lot of people are growing it, but it used to be a little bit cheaper. So growing triticale or oat in a mixture. And we have done, when we started this, we were looking at different species that we can plant and different mixes. And we found that the higher the number of mixes that you have, the lower the yields are. Because when you drop the grasses in the mixture, your dry matter is driven by the grasses. So we found that a 3-species mix will be the kind of the sweet spot to have a mixture. And we also seen like you grow triticale alone or triticale and oat mixture tend to produce the highest biomass, followed by maybe oat triticale pea, when we had a 6-species mixture, the yields are relatively lower. But the crude protein was a little bit higher because we had the peas and broadleaves in that mixture. Yeah.
Well, I'll just kind of open the floor to you now. I mean, we covered some of those research topics I brought up, but what other research have you guys conducted or currently conducting that you'd like the audience to hear about?
Yeah, so we have some interesting projects ongoing. 2 of them that I would like to mention. We're looking at management strategies to restore soil health in crop fields impacted by wildfire. So this is kind of becoming an issue. So we started a study last year to look at if you have a crop field that is burned by wildfire, how can you recover that? So we started that study last fall. We simulated burning of winter wheat stubble in the summer, and then we planted it to different treatments. So we have that study, and then we also have another study. It's a multi-state project looking at multiple factors, combining tillage, cover crop, nitrogen fertilizer management, and crop rotation to see how that will impact crop yields and soil health. We have that study ongoing in Osborne County, and I'm excited about that. We're growing corn, we're growing soybeans, so we have corn, soybean rotation, wheat, corn, soybean, and then we have continuous corn rotation down there. So that is very exciting, and then the wildfire study is also very exciting too.
Do you have any preliminary results you can share from those, or do we have to wait to have you on in the future to learn some things?
Yeah, the wildfire study, after we had the simulated burn, we took some soil measurements, we did infiltration. It is amazing to see that after the wildfire, 2 weeks after the wildfire, we saw a decrease in soil organic matter content. We also saw a decrease in soil aggregate stability, and we had the soil was a little bit denser, so it caused a little bit increase in penetration resistance and bulk density. And then infiltration measurements is hugely different between the unburned area has about 6.4 inches per hour compared to 2.2 inches per hour where we burn the field. Wow. So that is kind of interesting, and I think it's probably due to weakness of the soil structure after the burn. So we will see. We have a couple of treatments that we have implemented, including application of manure, cover crops, manure plus cover crop, and then we also added some biostimulants products that we applied in the fall of last year. So we'll be terminating the cover crops here very soon, and then we will take soil measurements too and see if we have gained anything after we implemented those treatments.
But it sounds like if a producer was impacted by a wildfire, they might need to think more seriously about what are some ways they can help restore their soil health.
Yes, the wildfire, in western Kansas and even in most areas that is even wet, once wildfire goes through, you remove the residue. And once the residue is gone, especially in western Kansas, it will have a significant impact on the soil. Both the chemical properties and the physical properties will be a challenge to restore that. So that is why we are looking at planting something quickly to get some residue input into the system. And then also adding manure is an organic a way of improving soil organic matter content and helping with improving water storage. So we will see when we sample here which of the treatments will be the best approach to use.
Well, that sounds like a good reason to have you back on in the future.
Yep.
Well, just to wrap up, the question I ask all my guests is, what's something that's currently exciting you either in your own work or something in the broader field that you've heard about that has you excited or optimistic?
Yeah, so most recently now we have, the grain prices are not as great as it used to be. So that makes our work that we're doing with integrated crop-livestock system and the forages more exciting because we have data that shows that if you have a combination of crops and livestock, the profitability is higher compared to a grain-based system. So we do have that data, and now our data is now very useful. It's kind of an applied kind of research, so that makes me more excited about some of the things that we are doing in western Kansas and trying to share some of the data that we've accumulated over the years to show farmers that You can integrate livestock as part of the production system. Either you have cattle or you can grow annual forages as part of the production system to help maintain profitability or even increase profitability of the overall production system.
I think that's absolutely true. It seems like every time I'm talking with a farmer or at an extension event, there's a growing awareness and recognition that exactly what you're saying is with these changing economic conditions that you have to find a way to diversify and get some different income streams if you want to protect yourself and insulate yourself. So I think like you said, your guys' research is so valuable for the folks of Western Kansas and maybe even beyond. And Dr. Obour, just want to give you thanks for coming on our show today.
Right. Thank you for having me.
Everybody, thank you for tuning into the K-State Regen Ag Podcast, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.